Britain in the 1950s was a nation quietly rebuilding itself. The war was finally over, rationing was lifting, and for millions of ordinary families, a motorcar was no longer a distant dream, it was becoming a very real possibility. Showrooms across the country filled with hopeful buyers, fathers clutching hard-earned savings, mothers imagining school runs without rain-soaked bus journeys. But beneath the polished bonnets and optimistic brochures, something was often deeply wrong. Some of these cars were fragile, frustrating, and frankly embarrassing. Today, we count down the 10 worst British family cars of the defining decade. Starting with number 10. Number 10. Morris Oxford Series MO. When Morris introduced the Oxford Series MO in 1948, British families allowed themselves to feel hopeful. Here was a proper four-door saloon built on pre-war mechanicals, yet presented with enough polish to suggest a new era of comfortable family motoring. The brochures made it sound wonderful. The reality did not cooperate. The 1,476cc side-valve engine produced just 41 brake horsepower, enough perhaps for an empty road, but inadequate the moment a family of 4 loaded their cases aboard. The gearbox was vague and unpleasant. Road noise poured through the cabin with alarming ease. The bodywork around the sills and wheel arches rusted distressingly quickly in Britain's damp climate, with owners discovering bubbling paintwork long before they expected. For a family who had saved diligently to afford this car, the deterioration felt personal. The Morris Oxford promised comfortable independence and offered frustration in its place. The car at number 9, however, made this look almost entirely acceptable. Number 9. Austin A40 Somerset. Launched in 1952, the Austin A40 Somerset arrived wearing styling that Austin clearly hoped would feel fresh and forward-looking. Its rounded bodywork, faintly American in its ambition, filled showrooms with curious buyers imagining a more modern Britain. But beneath that optimistic shell, this was a deeply compromised family car. The 1,200cc engine produced just 42 brake horsepower, ferociously inadequate when loaded with passengers and their luggage. Build quality was shockingly inconsistent. Doors misaligned from the factory. Trim rattled from the very first journey. The heating system was so ineffective in winter that families reportedly drove with their gloves still on. Rust attacked the sills and rear arches with vicious determination, arriving within a handful of years. Imagine saving carefully for this car and watching it physically deteriorate around your family. The Austin A40 Somerset was a bitterly disappointing purchase for those who deserved far better. The car at number 8 awaits, and it is considerably more infuriating. Number 8. The Hillman Minx. Throughout the early 1950s, the Hillman Minx was one of Britain's most visible family saloons. Roots Group promoted it as practical, sensible transport, the sort of reliable workhorse a growing household could genuinely depend upon. British families believed that promise in large numbers. Many came to regret it deeply. The 1,265cc side-valve engine delivered performance that felt apologetic at every opportunity. Carrying for adults with luggage on anything approaching a gradient was genuinely painful. The column-mounted gear lever became notorious among frustrated owners. The interior was stark and utterly cheerless, the heater barely qualified as one, and ride comfort on Britain's roads ranged from poor to genuinely punishing. Rust arrived predictably around sills, arches, and the boot lid, the thin steel corroding with quiet ferocity year after year. For families relying on this as daily transport, it offered endurance rather than any enjoyment. The car at number 7, if you can believe it, was even harder to bear. Number 7. The Standard Vanguard Phase 1. Standard launched the Vanguard in 1948 with enormous confidence. Here was a British car designed to compete on world markets, wearing bold American influence styling that turned heads. Inside sat a spacious, well-considered cabin, a proper family saloon with genuine ambition behind it. But ambition cannot compensate for engineering flaws, and the Vanguard had several significant ones. The Wetliner 2088cc engine ran notoriously hot and suffered cooling system failures with alarming regularity. Overheating on a long family journey was not a remote possibility but a genuine expectation. The 3-speed gearbox felt antiquated and imprecise. Fuel consumption was poor for modest family budgets. The steering was heavy enough to make urban driving exhausting. Rust developed stubbornly around the rear wings and below the doors. Repair costs routinely exceeded what ordinary working families could absorb. The Vanguard promised bold modern motoring and delivered mounting anxiety instead. The car at number 6 suffered from an entirely different kind of failure. Number 6, the Singer SM1500. Few British family cars of the early 1950s carried Singer's level of pretension. Launched in 1948, the SM1500 wore a handsome, upright body and carried a badge that whispered quality to buyers who could not quite afford something genuinely premium. Singer sold this image with considerable conviction. The reality, however, was brutally expensive to maintain. The twin-cam 1497cc engine was technically interesting but demanding in its service requirements, a problem when ordinary families needed reliability far more than engineering sophistication. Mechanical failures arrived frequently and repair bills were substantially higher than with humbler rivals. The bodywork corroded readily, the gearbox was notoriously fragile, and the electrical system, a recurring theme in British cars of this era, was notoriously unreliable. Families who had stretched their budgets to buy the Singer's implied prestige found themselves paying heavily for an illusion. Tell us in the comments, had you heard of this car before? The car at number 5 is somehow worse. Number 5, Standard 8. In 1953, Standard introduced their 8 as an entry-level family saloon for Britain's aspiring working class. Here was a car built to a price, and it showed in every conceivable dimension. The 803cc engine produced a mere 26 brake horsepower, which could only be described as laughable in a car intended to transport a family and their belongings across Britain's roads. Performance was so poor that overtaking required both patience and prayer. The specification was breathtakingly sparse: no external boot lid, requiring rear seat access for luggage, no heater as standard, no opening rear quarter windows. Families crammed into this tiny saloon for holidays and daily commutes found the experience increasingly grim with every passing mile. Build quality was rough, the ride harsh, and interior noise at any speed above 30 miles per hour made conversation practically impossible. The Standard 8 was precisely as inadequate as its price suggested. Number 4, Austin A30. When Austin launched the A30 in 1951, it was presented as genuine family transport, a small car with an honest heart, perfectly suited to Britain's growing suburban landscape. Many families were persuaded. The A30 was affordable, economical, and presented itself with a certain modest charm. But charm cannot disguise inadequacy forever. The tiny 803cc A-series engine produced just 28 brake horsepower, an honest output that became dishonest the moment a family of 4 attempted anything remotely ambitious. The 4-speed gearbox required constant attention and offered little reward. The interior was cramped to the point of discomfort on journeys of any length. Heating was inadequate. The body rusted with quiet aggression around the wheel arches and floor sections, often before the car was 5 years old. Parents who trusted the A30 to carry their children on summer holidays discovered its limitations on every single journey. Number 3 carried entirely different failures, and far more dangerous ones. Number 3, the Jowett Javelin. The Jowett Javelin arrived in 1947 carrying what seemed like genuine brilliance. Here was a genuinely progressive British family car, a streamlined, aerodynamic saloon powered by a flat-4 engine, offering torsion bar suspension and a ride that immediately felt sophisticated. Motoring journalists adored it. Families who bought it expected something truly special. What they received was something rather more complicated. The flat-4 engine proved catastrophically unreliable in service. Big end bearing failures became a serious and recurring problem, often resulting in complete engine destruction with little warning. The transmission suffered regular breakdowns. Cooling was inadequate. Warranty repairs grew so frequent and so costly that they played a direct role in the commercial collapse of Jowett itself, the company ceasing car production in 1954. Families who had invested their faith in the Javelin's progressive promise found themselves stranded, sometimes literally, supporting a car whose manufacturer no longer existed. The car at number 2 manages, almost impossibly, to be even more dispiriting. Number 2. Ford Popular 103e. In 1953, Ford launched the Popular 103e as the cheapest new car available in Britain, and it earned that distinction through extraordinary levels of austerity. Beneath its deliberately archaic styling sat a 1,172cc side-valve engine that had been considered dated a decade earlier. Performance was, by any honest measure, thoroughly inadequate for a country beginning to move at a faster pace. The specification was stripped to a degree that bordered on insulting. There were no direction indicators, no heater, no sun visor, and the mechanically operated drum brakes offered stopping power so feeble it barely qualified as safety equipment. Families who bought the Popular because it was all they could afford sat through British winters cold, cramped, and embarrassed. The Popular felt like poverty pressed into sheet metal, designed not to delight but merely to exist at a price. Families deserved far more than this. But the car at number 1 now awaits, and it defies belief. Number 1, the Bond Minicar. Nothing on this list prepares you for the Bond Minicar. Introduced in 1949 and sold throughout the 1950s. This extraordinary contraption was a three-wheeler powered by a tiny motorcycle engine and marketed to British families as genuine, affordable transport. That claim was remarkable in its audacity. Early models had no reverse gear whatsoever. To reverse, the driver was expected to exit the vehicle and physically lift and rotate the front wheel by hand, in rain and cold, with a family watching in disbelief. The single front wheel made handling alarming in dry weather and genuinely dangerous when wet. The bodywork was fragile to the point of absurdity. The engine vibrated constantly, the noise was relentless, and the ride bordered on punishment. Crashes were frequent. Yet thousands of British families placed their trust, and their children, inside this vehicle. The Bond Minicar was not a family car. It was a national embarrassment dressed as affordable transport. Looking back across the 1950s, it is impossible not to feel something deeply complicated, admiration for Britain's ambition, mixed with genuine sadness at the results. These were cars bought with hard-earned savings, trusted with family lives, and too often found wanting. The engineers were not incompetent, they worked under tremendous post-war constraints. But the families who paid for these vehicles deserved better than what they received. History, at least, can acknowledge that. If you remember seeing any of these on Britain's roads, share your thoughts below. And if you enjoy rich, cinematic British motoring history, please subscribe to Britain Rewind. We will see you in the next video.